Mahalo nui for these amazing introductions. I gotta add some of that to my bio. Um, it is an honor to be here and to speak with you all. And you may say that you've learned a lot from me, but I've definitely learned more from you throughout our exchanges in not just coursework, but organizing together, especially for freeing Palestinian thought and connecting and joining solidarities across mountains and across waters. So, Lena Mai Ka Hunalepo, o no o Kauwila Mahi, no moolelo o ahu keia, e haumana lai ulawau, malolo o ke kālai aina mana o politika, he haumana Mai Ka Hunalepo. Nah, Kanaka Maoli. But aloha, I'm Kauwila Mahi. I am a PhD student in political science with a focus on indigenous politics. Right now, the way my dissertation is looking, hopefully, is I'm talking about sense of place and sensory as a way of looking for and finding ways to rupture like colonialism and conquistador logics that are so pervasive in our community, and finding ways that we can attach to each other and join with each other through pilina, through relationships to our sense of place. And sometimes that looks like fragrance, like I've been gifted these very ona lei, like fragrant lei, and that in this setting can be a form of creating sovereignty in that we have all, well, people in this room can smell, hopefully, even through the mask, the fragrance of the lei, and that can be a way for us to shift our sociality and think through different ways of being and different forms of sociality. And I'm taking this idea of sociality from a Marxist kind of idea, or what kind of formations he's trying to establish in relationship to Western forms of sovereignty. What I'm trying to, I guess, assert through life writing is traditional forms of sovereignty, and namely, I'm going to be focusing on air through aloha. Got it. Okay. And so the name of today's talk is Mai Ka Hunalepo, Kaneikapuahiohio, from a dust mote to Kaneikapuahiohio. And Kaneikapuahiohio is an akua. And if you look at mele for Kane, there's one that sticks out for me, which Helupapa is different forms of Kane, and I believe they account for 40. But in these forms of Kane, they talk about all of these forms where this akua Kane is rising and emerging into different forms of heat, different forms of movement, different forms of aina, and how all of these play into each other. But what I'm focusing on from this mele is this akua Kaneikapuahiohio, and in English interpretation of this would be like a dust devil, if you've ever seen a dust devil before. And so the main takeaways I want for everybody in this particular talk is for us to think through how life writing can start from one speck of dust or even dusting off archival materials and moving us into joining together in order for us to create a dust devil, so we can rupture colonialism, so we can move together through, sometimes through ehu, and I'll explain a little more what that means in a bit, but also sometimes through other forms of resistance or emergence that emerge out of tradition. And this image, as some people may know, is of Captain Crookie, or Captain Cook, when we celebrated Valentine's Day by eating his heart out. Just kidding. But I know, I have horrible jokes, I'm sorry. But the reason I wanted to, I guess, start off with that image is just for us to think through what Hunalepo and what Kaneikapuahiohio can teach us in our traditional forms of dust and dirt, and especially how that ties into colonialism, but looking for ways to rupture those things to moolelo Hawaiʻi. Hele hoi kia la mauka o ka hele hoi kia la makai o punei o ka e la o ka pualei aloha ka pina I kukala ulei o puka kulai ka puulana aina ke akua e nohoi o ka umagana I o ka leo ele o le noi. And so now we're going over to Big Island, and we were already on Big Island in the beginning in that first slide, but we're going to a specific place, and the place we're at is in Kilauea. And the reason I'm starting off with this mele, Hemele no Pele, is that this is a mele that is offered when asking for permission to enter into her space, to enter into her domain. And the reason I offer up this mele to start off this conversation is for us to all think about what it means to surge up, or hua'e, like Pele does, to emerge and move forth like Pele does. Sometimes Pele eats some or devours specific aina that may have been valuable not just to mahiko or like sugar planters, but also to Kanaka Maoli. And so I want us to think through what that looks like when we're trying to rupture the colonialists inside of ourselves, or the conquistador logics, the patriarchal logics, the capitalistic logics that we sometimes inherit from the people that we are around, or from teachings that we've experienced. And so this image is 3 different photos that I guess moved together. The one on the farthest left is a photo taken by my mother in 1997 on February 4th. And in that photo, this is when, so for context, this photo was taken inside of the Hawaii state capitol, or the fake state capitol. And these were the overnight vigils that were taking place in that time period to stop, I believe it was, they were trying to make an amendment through the state to Article 12, Section 7, the one for gathering rights for Kanaka Maoli. And what they were trying to do was amend it so that essentially Kanaka Maoli would no longer have access to shorelines, no longer have access to uka spaces. And all of this obviously was met with resistance, but not the type of resistance specific to only settler colonialism, but a resistance to the type of change that endangers other life, right? That endangers our relationships to our aina, that endangers our relationships to our lahui, to our community, which is also our aina, which is also the more than human relations, which are the plants and all of the flora fauna. And so my mom was a Hawaiian sovereignty photographer in the 1990s. She trained under multiple people, but the reason she isn't, I guess, well known, and well, what in her own words, is that she's queer. And so having to confront the image or her lens of queerness through the movement for Hawaiian sovereignty was difficult, and pushed her kind of back in being a focalized voice or lens or image that was being carved out at the time. And the base layer that you see is a Kilauea or Halema'uma'u on a trip that I went with my mother and my daughter and my partner. And when we were there, right after this, like 5 minutes after this, after we gave ho'okupu along with a lot of people that were there for Merry Monarch, Pele arose, and and so we're just like, yeah, we're supposed to be here and we're supposed to be doing this. And then this third image is actually a screenshot from Le Maile Barrett, who was at the time working with OEV TV and Kanaka in the 2020 opening of the legislation right before COVID hit Hawaiʻi, even though COVID was already kind of moving out throughout the world. And so these three images together on this is for us to reconsider where Pele is and what Pele looks like, and who are the people, who are the who or the maka'ainana from Pele. And if you didn't know, just further context, the Hawaii state capital was designed to be like a volcano. And so the same type of politics that happen in Kilauea are the same type of politics that we use when we are inside of the Hawaii state capital as Kanaka Maoli. And so my style of story sharing comes from my tutuhine, Gertrude Lillian Tollefson Mahi. She was a lei hulu maker and a moolelo from Molokai. And I spent a lot of, well, most of my summers with her when I was younger, up until I was 7. And the reason I say that my methodology of story sharing comes from her is that she is a really well-known lei maker, and she actually made lei hulu for a living. And the way she did that was sharing, well, she was a sole lei maker for Kamehameha schools between 1982 to 1991. So all those lei that people would wear in song contests were all made by her by hand. And so that's how she made her living. And the reason, well, I take on some of those praxis, those methodologies by looking for some of the best lei hulu. Sometimes I'm going out and searching for them, and like a kapi o monu or like a bird snatcher. And sometimes those birds come to me. Sometimes the ike is brought to me and I'm a conduit of it. So I try to share it whenever I can and make a lei. And I'll be stringing together different types of resources and different ike, different life forms and life writing throughout this presentation. And again, I'm from Mauna Loa, which is now referred to as Hawaii Kai, named after Kaiser. Yeah, and we'll come back to this in a second. And so the ka'ino kala, or the flow of today, is there's gonna be 4 chapter-ish thingies, 4 phrases or 4 ipa, 4 au, however you want to think about it. And so the first one is really thinking through what an archive is. And specifically, I'll be talking about kino lahi lahi and kino ohaha. And then I'll be talking a little bit about radicalizing archilina and liberationalist knowledge productions through life writing. And then Kikahio Ka Hunalepo. If you know me, you know I use this, or I have a deep relationship with one specific palapala, a speck of dust, and I'll explain it in a little bit. And then we'll close it with Kaneikapuahiohio and making a dust devil. So how we can make trouble together. Okay. So na kino lahi lahi, I'm in a kino ohaha. In 1870, in 1862, Joseph Ho'ona'awa Kanepu'u writes this really important letter to Kapihenui, who was the current editor at that time of Kahoku o Kapaki Pika. And he's a little bit worried about how there are portions of kau, or portions of mele, so portions of songs that were being omitted inside of the newspapers. And the reason this worries Kanepu'u is that he knows that the future is going to want this. And we can know that he's thinking about the future, or that he has his vanana or his ulana, like interweaving different futures, because inside of the palapala, which is dusted off by Kumunoinoi Silva in Power of the Steel Tip Pen, they say, e make make ana na ka hanauna Hawaiʻi, ona la ade umikumawalu kanahiku, me ade umikumawalu kanavalu, me ade umikumawalu kanaiva, a me ade umikumaiva kanaiva. Yeah. And you can read the interpretation below, which is generations of Hawaiians in 1870, 1880, 1890, and the 1990s, 100 years later, more than a century later, 130 years later, are going to want these moolelo, these stories. And Joseph Ho'ona'au Kanepu'u is actually also from Mauna Loa. And inside of some of the Atikala Nupepa, inside of some of the publications that he's sending in to different newspapers, he often reintegrates how he talks about his aina, which is Mauna Loa, the same aina that I'm from. And Mauna Loa is Kuapa, which is the local inside of Mauna Loa that you saw a little bit earlier inside of the photo, prior to Kaiser and Bishop Estate selling that land to Kaiser, was one of the most efficient locally or fish farms in the Pacific or in Oceania. And so I like to think of the same type of abundance that was being produced inside of that aina is the same type of abundance that can be shared through these mo'olelo, through these pu'uonoa, through these sacred spaces that stop violence, that were carved out by our kupuna, that were established by our kupuna in Nupepa. Okay. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Kino Ohaha. And Kino Ohaha is about, Ohaha, one of the meanings of Ohaha is like to be full from food. And another meaning that you can find inside of Fukui's dictionary is it's the third or fourth generation of kalo that comes after, having had that kalo in your specific ohana, in your specific place for multiple generations. And this Atikala Nupepa in Ko Hawaiʻi Aina that was published on May 4th in 1878 is actually from the Miwok Shingle Springs Band of Indians inside of California. And Kanaka Maoli were heading over to California during the gold rush, and a contingent of Kanaka Maoli moved into what is now understood as Sacramento, and were actually some of the first non-indigenous to that aina settlers. And because Kanaka Maoli had become a little bit affluent in that time period, the relationships become trickier than what we think of today as like settler colonialism or thinking about capitalism. But the reason that I wanted to share this particular Atikala, that was written by Paniani, who is one of the people that is writing from up there and is also a subscriber to Ko Hawaiʻi Aina inside of California, is in this little hauku, in this phrase. They talk about how Ko Hawaiʻi Aina became one thing that sustained their food and their happiness for because after this portion, they talk about how they had just experienced a flood in the place where they were at, sitting alongside the Shingle Springs Miwok Band of Indians. And for the Kanaka Maoli and for the Shingle Springs, they found this Atikala Nupepa that was still being delivered to them as something that could give them joy and something that would be fulfilling for them. And this is the same type of way that Kanaka Maoli are thinking through mo'olelo, thinking through life writing, and theorizing how important and how sustaining and how fulfilling mo'olelo and ike can be. And we also need to think about, when we talk about archives, how much kaona we can hue, like how much kaona can be unveiled just from one specific word. And so I always use this term, which is lehua, because every time I use it, or every time that I put it in a presentation, there's also another layer of this word that is uncovered outside of Fukui's dictionary. And that's not to say Fukui's work isn't amazing and super important, but there are other layers of meaning that can be shared through this mo'olelo. So we can think through what an archive is when we think through what a lehua is. And if you know one of my kumu who has been my kumu off and on for 21 years now, since I was like 6 years old, Kumu Loyana Wong. He has his favorite phrase that everyone repeats, but he never put it inside of a paper. Pua does not mean flower. He has a lot of other funny quotes, but we won't get into those. But really thinking through what is lehua as a way to frame an archive. And so some of the images that you see come from different spaces. And so I'll share them kind of briefly. And these are concepts that aren't inside of the dictionary, but you can glean from moolelo and from mele, or even from interviews in Kaleo Hawaiʻi. And so one resource for Waimaka lehua, which isn't explicitly in Pukoi's dictionary as an entry, is Makana Kaneikapuahiohio's thesis, where she talks about Waimaka lehua and menstruation as being pili to kanepui ke akua, or when wahine are in menstruation, then they are in closer, I guess, proximity to akua than most people are. So there's a lot of insights that you can get from the work that was done by Makana. Lehua outside, well, lehua is also the name of the first person to die in a battle, but also the first person to lose in a sham battle in traditional Hawaiian games, or le'a Hawaiʻi, as distinct from pa'ani Hawaiʻi. A lehua is also somebody who is a master at something. And so people like Anakala Erika Anana are masters of not just lawai'a or fishing knowledge and fishing relationships, but of creating pilina between multiple generations. He was always at Kikulakai Punio Anuenue when I was there as a youth, and imbued so many lessons into all of the students and all the kumu and the po'okumu now of that space. And then there's like lehua-like flowers that are also lehua in that context. In Kaleo Hawaiʻi, there's a few interviews with Malia Craver where she talks about lehua and la'au lapa'au, and how lehua can be used as a medicine for thrush, especially for youth. And the process they use is crushing up the lehua, and then sometimes they would put the seeds. So I guess you could, I don't know the word in English, but you would move the seeds with your hand, and then you put it in water. In one of she has 4 interviews where she talks about lehua as medicine, and so does Auntie Alice Namakelua inside of Kaleo Hawaiʻi. And then I think most people kind of know lehua is also a lover, which is also in Pukoi's dictionary, but the specific type of love that is being shown, I'll explain a little bit more in a second. And then Kalehua Vehe, one of my favorite surf breaks and relationships that I love to think about a lot, just off of Kaimana Hila Le'ahi Lai'ahi. And then the lehua inside of San Francisco, that was brought by Kalakaua on the first leg of his journey around the world in 1880. That is still there today, and you can go there and see the lehua. It's right off Ghirardelli Square. It's the first train stop or the trolley stop on if you're leaving from Ghirardelli Square and go up. And they also have lehua inside of the Palace Hotel in San Francisco with a little commemoration of the Vida Kalakaua. And then another form of lehua is Pana'ewa, who is in a mo'o akua from Hilo, or from Pana'ewa actually. But one of the forms that Pana'ewa takes up is lehua, and you can read that in the mo'olelo and in the mele, that they're changing in between different sources of water. And so really, again, lehua has so many meanings and holds so much ike that you really have to dive into mele and think about different genres of life writing when we think about what it means to be a lehua. And so my favorite example of this is a mele that's offered by Hi'iaka Polio Pele, and she offers a mele to Kaneikapuahiohio in one of the in the later Nupepa and like Kau 112, like the 112th mele or Kau. And what happens is she doesn't have vai with her. She doesn't have vai that she's carrying with her, but there are lehua around. And so instead of offering vai in like the literal form in a kanoa, what she does is she offers vai as a ho'okupu to Kaneikapuahiohio through the lehua flower. And in this type of offering, in that same type of logic, we can theorize and we know that lehua flowers are the same type of, lehua flowers and trees are the necessary are necessary for gathering water on top of Mauna, right? And so this is how we can get our aquifers sustained. This is how we can ensure that like Billy Omoimoy or Billy Kinney, he uses a phrase akua first. It's like where water is moving in between under the mountains into the mountains. But again, lehua is important to storing knowledge, to bringing in water and supplying and sustaining life for all of Hawaii. And so you can see now there's like runoff, from different plants being interjected into Hawaii's mountainscapes. And so like plants like haulekoa, plants like mango, they don't sustain our land in the same way, not just that they're invading or using a conquistador logic to conquer a whole mountain, but quite literally they're changing the topography and ontologically shifting what the mountain looks like, because they're not bringing water into the roots of the system. They're not bringing water into the mountains. And that brings us to radicalizing our pilina. And so I guarantee everybody who is in this presentation, and if you haven't, I'm sorry for you, but has at least heard a little bit about January 17, 1893, and the overthrow of Keliʻiwahine Liliuokalani. And when we think about life writing, the Hawaii story by Hawaii's queen, her iteration of life writing, her iteration of Kumulipo, of the moolelo to do with the establishment of Hawaii, sharing her genealogy, sharing intimate moments that she's having with some of her lahui, even sharing intimate moments of hatred in the original version of the book that's being published, is probably one of the most radicalizing puke for people inside of Hawaii, for people to change how we think about how important life writing is, but also for people to think about how we consider who gets to share and who gets to establish what a story is, what a moolelo is. And so for Liliuokalani, or for Kanaka Maoli today, more than 130 years later, so this is 260 years after Kanepu'u's writing about the future, we still turn to this text and we still think about the life writing of Liliuokalani, and we're learning more and more about her, and intimating or becoming more intimate with the materials that have to do with her, whether they are her piano inside of Washington Place, whether they are the sounds and songs that she's composing, whether they are letters where she's talking trash to Hawaii. She tells Hawaii not to marry any Hale people in a few of her letters. And we can glean a different type of polity, a different type of relationship, a different type of sovereignty than what is typically recapitulated today. Today, most of us try to return back to, I guess, violent Western forms and like patriarchal normative forms of what sovereignty looks like. But I don't think that's what Liliuokalani was trying to establish. What she was asserting was a completely different radical politic, which focused on the relationship building with specific people in specific aina for them to establish what the needs are of each and every aina. And so if you look at there's a translation that's done by Emma Aima Navahi inside of Nupepa Keloha Aina, and they do, I think, 30-ish like pages of translation in the Nupepa, there's also stories that don't make it into the English publication. And so one of the things that we should also try and look at and remember when you think about life writing is sometimes there are stories that are changed, or when we go through publication in the same way Liliuokalani had to go through her publication process in the 1890s, where it was Haole dominant in 1893 especially. And she had to shift a lot of the narrative about what she really wanted to say, her critiques of the Big Five, of the settler government, of the PG or Tiki provisional government. And with all of that Ike being omitted, Emma Navahi wanted to ensure some of the original drafts that she was writing made it into that Nupepa. And you can read their exchanges in the letters that they're writing to each other inside of the M93 or Liliuokalani collection at the Hawaii State Archives. And yeah, if in addition to those types of intimate exchanges, there are other exchanges where they talk about the sensory capacities of like Liliuokalani when she's going with Ke'eli Kolani to Mauna Kea and to Halima'u, and they talk about what type of leid they're wearing, which isn't in any other publication. It isn't in the English, isn't in letters. It's only inside of that Nupepa in Aloha aina. So I'm going to move to Kikahio Ka Hunalepo, a speck of dust in the eye of the colonizer. And so if you've been to any of my presentations, you're probably tired of seeing this pala, but this is a pala that I have a lot of affection for, that I have a lot of love for, and I have a lot of respect for. And the reason for that is that it ruptured and shattered everything I thought I knew about aina. I thought I knew that we, as Kanaka Maoli, I mean, we say that olelo no eo heli ika aina he kawa ke Kanaka often, but we don't really process through what it looks like to be part of aina contemporarily. And at that time, it was so normative and so ingrained in society that for this person, Wahine Pi'i, at the end of the letter, she omits her name. And instead, she signs Ovonomik Mahalo, or yours sincerely, Kikahio Ka Hunalepo, one of your humblest citizens or subjects, and a speck of dust in your kingdom. And she's writing this petition to Kauwila Kamehameha III. And the reason that this shattered, like how I perceived our kupuna, is that even when they're going in to contest the capacity of Kauwila'uli's malu, like how much capacity Kamehameha III had to protect all of the subjects of Ko Hawaiʻi Aina, as the person who established in the Western form Hawaii as a sovereign nation, there are still people who are falling between the cracks. There are still people who are being marginalized. And she's checking his capacity to do that by also doing what we call now today hapailaho, or like brown nosing, with that, if I'm not cussing. And so by calling herself Hunalepo, she's not only establishing herself as as a speck of dust or as a part of aina, she's also saying that Kauwila, being the chief, being the ali'i of Ko Hawaiʻi aina at the time, is the aina, and therefore he cannot be the ali'i without her Hunalepo, without the Hunalepo. He can't be an aina, he can't be a land, he can't be a mountain if he cannot protect the smallest speck of dust, smallest subject of Ko Hawaiʻi aina. And so Wahine Pi'i writes this contesting letter because this person, Kili'i Umiumi, who is part of Lahaina Luna Seminary, like one of the first graduating classes alongside David Amalo, then he deserts her for 10 years. And yeah, I know. And basically, he's what kids today would call an F-boy. And the reason that I think not only does Wahine Pi'i's Leka Ho'opi'i or petition to the Privy Council, the Ahakuka Malu, check Kauwila, she's also checking what are the laws that are possible inside of Hawaii. Like, does she have a right to divorce him when he deserted her for 10 years? Does she not? Does he have to pay for their child's food? What are the capacities by which the government is going to protect every single subject, especially marginalized wahine inside of Hawaii? And another thing about Lepo, this is a book of name chants that was presented to Kalakaua after he became crowned or coronated in March 14th, 1883. And it's in the Kekahuna collection, M445 at the Hawaii State Archives, box 1, folder 11. And so they talk about in this mele inoa for Kalakaua, they compare him to Lepo, to dirt. In this first two lalani, in these first two lines, they draw these connections to Lepo through different forms of akua, and what we understand today as like the four major akua, which are ku, lono, kane, and kanaloa. And so their forms inside of this moolelo, or inside of this mele for Kalakaua, are ku ikalepo, lono ikalepo, kane ikalepo, and kanaloa ikalepo. And so these, we can learn a little bit more about how our akua and how our aina can not only disrupt what is the normative today, but also how maka'ainana, especially subjects of or people in close proximity to ali'i, to chiefs, were talking about aina and talking about aina as an akua that is important to every part of their life. And so another thing about how dust and dirt can rupture colonialism is when we think about how ingrained terminology for Lepo are inside of things like Lua. And so inside of Lua, there are over 24 terminology that have to do with dirt, like Lepo and dust. And oftentimes these terminology are different types of strikes that have to do with how you're moving a specific weapon, how you're moving or throwing somebody to the ground, and what kind of dust is coming up from that movement that you're making, or if you're throwing somebody to the ground. And so this image is actually one that I designed I 3D printed out of plastic to explore the plasticity of mo'olelo between different between different time periods, and specifically looking at the mo'olelo of Pi'i Mai Va'a as he's rising up or coming up in his ranks under Umiali law. And so in one particular portion of the mo'olelo, what starts to happen is there is a kaua between ko Hawaiʻi moku and ko Maui moku, or between Hawaii Island and Maui, and it's taking place inside of Ka'uiki. And Ka'uiki is a place where change is instantiated oftentimes, especially in Maui genealogies. And so Ka'ahumanu was born in Ka'uiki. What else? Hononike Trask reps Ka'uiki and Hana hard. And Ka'uiki, Hana, Hamua, that east side of Maui, it was like the last stand of Ike Hawaii, Loina Hawaii, and Olelo Hawaii in Maui for the longest time. But now that's moving more and spread out more through Maui, and also spread out more through Ko Hawaii Paina throughout the Hawaiian archipelago. And the reason I share this is that Pi'i Mai Va'a actually has a particular weapon inside of the mo'olelo, and the name of the weapon is Kahuelepo. And Kahuelepo means the dust maker. But beyond that, Huelepo is also to uncover kauna, or to uncover what meaning is. And so in the mo'olelo, there is this ki'i that is established by the Maui side in Ka'uiki, on top of the ulili, on top of the bridge that they're climbing. And for almost in Honolulu for almost 10 days, nobody wants to challenge the ki'i because it stands at 8 feet tall above Kauwiki, and it only appears at night. And every time that Kanaka from Umialiloa's contingent are going, well, Umialiloa and Iha'a Pi'ilani's contingent are going to climb up, they always back down because they're afraid of this ki'i, which is named Kavala ki'i inside of the moolelo. But Pi'imaiwa'a has the la'au palau, or this type of club in his hand. And inside of the moolelo, that club is named Kahuelepo. And other moolelo that have this weapon, the dust maker, the dust, uncovering the dust, or meaning making, is Kavelo on Kauai. When he's on Kauai, he has it. And then there's one more moolelo that has this weapon, this incredulous weapon that has magic and the power to, if I'm borrowing the Harry Potter reference, hominum revelio, which is like revealing what is human or revealing what is sacred sometimes too. And in the moolelo, this is the sole ki'i that I've come across. There may be others where any ki'i is holding a club and a la'au palau. And so I thought that was a really interesting idea to explore. And so I tried to explore what it looked like, because we don't have that ki'i anymore, even though it's pretty clear from the mo'olelo that it's at the bottom of Kauwiki, still in the ocean. Yeah, I'm not going to get into that. Okay, and that's going to bring us into Kaneikapuahiohio, or making a dust devil, and how we make trouble together is really all it is. And I'm organizing these thoughts around thoughts that were established by aloha aina, especially in Honolulu. Oh my gosh. There's a specific meeting that happens in Honolulu that was guided by aloha aina o Nalede, that was at the present day USPS across the street from Iolani Palace. And inside of that meeting, there were over 500 wahine that organized with each other to make trouble to the provisional government who overthrew Lili'uokalani. And in that gathering, in the New Pepa, they say that there were so many people they couldn't even fit in the door. And there are people outside trying to listen in. And what's amazing to me about this is that the wahine organized themselves through New Pepa and on the ground within 2 weeks' notice to arrive at this location just for the Honolulu one. Because there's these types of organizations that are happening all across Hawaiʻi Aina in 1893. So this happens, well, this isn't that image, but that happened inside of March of 1893.
Is this was that the Hilo image, or was that the Honolulu image?
This is the Hilo image.
Yeah.
And so returning back to Ku, Lono, Kane, and Kanaloa, I wanted to show you all what a dust devil looks like. And this is a Kaneikapuahiohio on Maui. And so if you look at mo'olelo for lua, especially, that happened on Maui, oftentimes, well, the one that's referenced by Kamakau inside of Atikala Nupepa takes place in between Wailuku and Wai'ehu. And if you've been to Maui, if you're driving from the second safe and you're going towards Wai'ehu Ko, towards the Hawaiian homesteads, there's one particular stop sign where you're turning, where the whole where the weather changes, right? Like it drops 10 degrees, it gets 10 degrees cooler, and there's always more shade on that side of Wai'ehu. That's where the mo'olelo I'm referencing comes from, where they talk about ehu, and like ehu, which is like a dust coming up, but ehu also means violence. And so I'm not saying that we're all gonna go out and be violent in that particular way where we're like striking people, but sometimes the act of decolonization is violent upon ourselves, in that we're trying to cut out or gouge out these colonialist thoughts that we have imbued within all of us. And so it's a very visceral process. And I think all scholars who are indigenous have talked about this. If you look at Fanon, he talks about how we can anticipate violence coming by our exchanges with each other, and how we're like moving more towards ceremony, moving deeper into cultural song, moving deeper into relationships with one another, which promulgates, in his own words, violence within our community, but mostly within ourselves. And then if you look at Simpson, she talks about how this is an insurgent methodology where we need to essentially dive deeper into our relationships with each other, and how this process is often violent or recapitulates violence because we are, patriarchy is so ingrained within movement building that we all inherit it, men and women, people who are in between those gender spectra also have those violences within ourselves. And another person who is talking about this through food sovereignty is Cote, from Washington, COTE. I don't know, not everybody, most people know Simpson and Fanon, but Cote is kind of not as well known. And she talks about how stories and moolelo are not only important to building food sovereignty, but also important into intimating why you should even be talking about something, or why your relationship, why you are, you as an individual and you as a collective have the opportunity to make change and shift the world that you are living in. And she talks in particular about sockeye salmon in territories throughout Washington. And so mo'olelo and life writing for us in Hawaii has everything to do with meeting material needs, making change, and ensuring that the changes we make can be sustained. And so for some people that looks like literally being on the ground, knowing what our emergency foods are from mo'olelo. We can see in mo'olelo, uwala is an emergency food that can be propagated in less than 6 weeks sometimes, and they're mo'olelo about that. We can see how specific varieties of kalo can grow in roughly the same time. Other emergency foods like Mai'a, you can even eat lehua, or you can eat tea, like lau tea or tea leaf. All of these are emergency crops, and if it really comes down to it, our mo'olelo have the potential to unlock what our emergency crops, or what the things we need to create material, to meet people's material needs are today, without imagining what we have to do tomorrow. We can go into our aina and start doing these things today, and essentially have access and create access for our po'e through these things. But other types of material needs are mo'olelo, or creating access for Kanaka Maoli to explore what mo'olelo should feel like in different genre outside of writing, outside of sometimes mele. And for me, that's looked like making video games, or pa'anivikio in Hawaiian language, rooted in mo'olelo. And so one example of that would be how as a collective, amongst a collective of people, there was an iteration between Kanaio Kana and Initiative for Indigenous Futures, a collective from Ganwage in Canada, now referred to, well, in close proximity to what is now referred to as Montreal. Their po'e oiwi, their indigenous people came over here to offer up ike, and we shared our ike back. And what was created was video games rooted in mo'olelo Hawaii. And so in this level, you're in space, you're in the future, but what's already there are your mo'olelo. In particular, we're looking at Kamapua'a. And with these types of, like, when we think about lepo, when we think about hunalepo, when we think about the things that come and go with us, we have to remember that these are things that are part of our cosmogony and cosmology from our inception. at the creation of the universe, when it's all vale, when it's all slime, there's also dust, there's also dirt. And the West has just discovered this in the last 40 years, right? Well, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson. And these concepts that are newer in the Western forms are, I guess, ingrained in society, ingrained in our moolelo already. Like, we knew that Hunalepo was part of our cosmogony. We knew that we come from space dust, as it's referred to today. But even when we go, when we think about, or when we carve out, or when we ulana, when we interweave our futures, we always remember that it's from the past too. And so we can create different types of socialities through art, and through art we can teach mo'olelo. And so another way of creating sociality or movements for of sovereignty is streetwear. And so this is a project I helped Fit Hawaiʻi at for the 10th anniversary in 2015. And the goal of the project, when we were doing what we call mo'olelo design or mo'olelo aesthetics, is finding a way to ensure that people understood the mo'olelo of kakuhi hava, but also rooting it in types of like sports attire that are also prevalent or related to Kanaka Maoli. And so you can see, you can see the Islanders logo.
Yeah.
And also, like, as a tangent, one of the things that we didn't want to tell everybody was that one of the people who created baseball, Alexander Cartwright, the one who established the rules of the one that we play today, he was part of the Hawaiian monarchy. He sat on different, not part of the Hawaiian monarchy. He sat in with Hawaiian monarchy. Aside from that, Kalakaua is the first person of like that stature of a president, a royal, a monarch, someone of that stature to witness a baseball game live. And he actually witnesses a game in 1891, a month before he passes, in San Francisco. Actually in a park that's pretty close to where that lehua in Deli Square is. And so baseball, that's why Kanaka Maoli goes so hard on baseball, or one reason. But one thing about that too is you can see that there's Hunalepo being an ehu being sprung up every time Kanaka Maoli are playing. And Hawaiians have won, the Hawaiian national team has won like the World Series. Yeah, Little League World Series so many times that's also another form of movement building that has been going on since the Hawaiian monarchy, that has persisted since that time. And so other things to remember, or other things to dust off, are how much music plays a part inside of our movements for air. And this particular photo, I helped Rexy and the Rally Round Band in establishing their connection to Mele Hawaiʻi that they didn't know at the time they knew, which is the Royal Hawaiian Band who toured throughout the world after the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. And just that type of mo'olelo of resistance that is imbued within Mele. I'll skip over these. I know I'm running low on time. Okay, and actually, yeah, I'll start here. And so when we think about stories, story sharing and life writing, we also should remember how other people that love us or have loved people that we care about talk about our mo'olelo and how that can be radicalizing for us as well. And so one of my favorite examples of this is Mele Inoa that was composed for Duke Kahanamoku after his passing. And inside of there's 4 inside of this. And if you want to look it up, just look up this Oe Naka Ahu Pahau. And in this particular portion of this Mele Inoa for Kahanamoku, they compare Duke Kahanamoku or they say he's a grandchild of Ka'ahupahau because he's so fast in the water, but also because of the radical politic that Duke Kahanamoku had when he went out to like, serve community, to serve Lahue. And if you don't know who Ka'ahupahau is, too bad. Nah. Ka'ahupahau is one of the akua wahine for female ancestral elements or gods from Pu'uloa, what is now contemporarily referred to as Pearl Harbor. And Ka'ahupahau is one of the kia'i of that wahi, in the same way that Tukahanamoku was a kia'i of that wahi and of Hawaii aina. And Ka'ahupahau also kia'i Kalehuawehe, which I mentioned earlier, and all throughout Oahu and other islands too. But moving from how we talk about aina, how we talk about kia'i, how we talk about akua, into how we talk about each other, should be a way for us to realize how much potentiality we have to engender change, to incite change, to animate change, rooted in mo'olelo, rooted in our kupuna. And so it's clear that they're referencing ike kupuna. It's clear that they're referencing Ka'ahupahau. And so that brings me to one of my favorite quotes related to Ka'ahupahau. And this is actually an image I made. And I kind of follow the style of posters that are shown inside of Kulakaipuni throughout Hawaii. And I'll read it, which is Hepeku kupaka awana ipa kahi o Ka'ahupahau i ka pauhai o ka aito ke ho'opunana aku ma kona home ma pu'uloa. And the reason I show this to kind of close off this presentation is that when I first heard this mo'ola, or when I first heard about this Atikala Nupepa, we were at Kapukaki, and Kyle Kajihiro shared this poku from the Nupepa, and the one interpretation is that the tail of Ka'ahupahau is going to thrash the flagpole or the American flag, or America is the eagle, if they try to establish itself as a punana, as a nest inside of Pu'uloa. And I really like this poku, and the Kumanoinoi's interpretation is better. That the one that was used inside of that, I guess, meeting. But the ha'i'olelo of that story that was being shared at Kapukaki. But yes, like the final thought I have with this is that mo'olelo, especially when we talk about aina and hunalepo, all has to do with our pivina to it, and our relationships to one another, our relationships to dust, our relationships to our land are the things that establish ourselves as Kaneikapuahiohio. That is how we rise up, that is how we emerge, and that is how we can swarm together to not only create change in our community, but to sustain and rise up whenever we need to. We want to ensure that we protect the lives of the future by knowing the lives of the past. Mahalo.
Oh, wow.